I had a point here I was going to say, but I got so excited about Habbo Hotel, I forgot about it. All right, well, let's do it. Welcome, everyone. This is the PBBG Podcast, episode 6. We are joined here again with Zaalah. Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's always good to have these conversations. Today, we're going to be talking about kind of the overarching question of why do we play? PBBGs in particular, but also maybe just generally, why do we play games? I guess kind of thinking in the general sense, starting there, I was thinking about this for myself, like wondering why I play any games. And I don't know if I would call myself a competitive person, but I do like engaging socially with people when I play games. So we'll get into some of the details, what that means later in terms of some of these categorizations of motivations, I guess. But I think that's where I fit as a person. Do you have a sense of what like drives you when you play any game in particular?
Yeah, like for me, I think it used to be more of an unhealthy reason. Like I think it used to be a lot of escapism and just trying to get away from the real world and like, you know, having an identity in another world which has like very clearly defined rules that are, you know, you can always follow, you can always get ahead. There's always progression. There's always a feeling of moving forward. And so I think that's kind of like maybe what sort of got me into them in the first place. But I think for the most part now, my love for them is just kind of figuring out mechanics, figuring out how things work. Like essentially someone is creating an entire set of rules, an entire like universe really from scratch, like from their mind, and seeing how that all plays out and how the interactions play out and how like, what things can I do? What things can't I do? Like what works? How could I get ahead of other people? Like figuring that out is really fun for me. Like, I think I have some friends who like, board games as an example, they would play the same board game for years and get really, really good at it. And they would love it and want to master it. And I would be fine playing a brand new board game, like every single week and learning how it works and figuring out how all the pieces fit together. And then once I feel like I've figured it out, like I'm kind of good. I'll move on to the next thing. So video games is kind of like a way for me to, figure that stuff out, see, how things fit together. But as far as like the actual stereotypes and like where I would fit, I feel like I kind of fit more in like the achiever category. And we'll kind of go into this more in a little bit.
Sure.
But yeah, definitely like wanting to collect all the different things, get all the achievements, feel like I'm progressing forward, seeing that progress bar fill up, which is also what, attracts me to PBBG is all the progress bars filling up. So
yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, that's a good segue into what we were going to talk about here as far as it's called the Bartle Taxonomy of player types. Yeah. So this is what we're talking about here in terms of the different ways that players can be grouped by the motivation that they have while they play. I guess we could go through these quadrants.
Yeah. So for everyone who's listening, it's kind of like an XY quadrant. So at the very top, you have people who prefer to act. And then at the very bottom, you kind of have people who prefer to interact. That's kind of the Y of the graph. And then on the left-hand side of the X-axis, you have players, so people who care more about individual players. And on the right-hand side of the axis, you have the world, so players who care more about the world. And this was originally created around multiplayer games specifically, but it also kind of applies to single-player games as well. And so in the top left quadrant, we're kind of going to go clockwise around. Again, if you're listening, maybe pull this up or look at it. It's pretty, straightforward. The Bartle, what is it? Bartle Taxonomy?
Yeah, taxonomy of
player types.
Yep.
So yeah, so you have killers, players who care a lot about acting and care about interacting with players. You have achievers, players who also care a lot about acting and want to interact more with the world. You have explorers who want to interact with the world and also just want to interact with other players. And then you have socializers who want to interact with other players, but in the context of just player to player. So these kind of like spread out, sort of the different extremes of players. And I think we're going to spend some time kind of just going through each of these types and sort of how PBBGs might appeal to different types of these players.
Yeah, it's a great summary. Thank you. As I was saying, I mean, these aren't like hard definitions. I think, anyone could fall in between some of these sometimes versus other times.
Sure.
And for me personally, I think just because of the way my relationship with, I guess, games and time and, other obligations, whatnot, I've found myself drawn more towards socializing just because that's the most fun part of games for me right now is just seeing, hey, how's it going for you? What are you doing? Can I join? Can I help you out? Can you help me out? that's a lot more enjoyable for me right now versus maybe being something like a killer or even an achiever like I was back in the day. But yeah, on that note, maybe we could look at some of these in the context of PBBGs. Actually, I was wondering, we did talk about Elithor on our last podcast. I was wondering if you looked at, as you were making the game and play testing it and talking to your players, if any of these types of categories kind of bubbled up as something that your players were drawn to in Elithor specifically.
Yeah. So I think as I mentioned earlier, I sort of fit personally more into the achiever category. And so I think not knowing it, but sort of as a game dev, you tend to create the game that you want to play. And so it tends to, gravitate closer toward the thing that you personally care about. And so Elithor really is kind of more catered toward achievers. Like there's the compendium, for example, which is you kill a certain number of monsters and you fill up the progress bar, and then you can complete it. So it's not like an infinite scaling thing. Like you get to a point where the bar's all the way green, you get all the stats from it, it's the benefit is there, and then you're done and you can move on to the next thing. Or even tiers, the way that the tier system works in Elithor is once you are at, the current tier of gear, that's it. There's not like a level of, progressing. It's like, I achieved this. I am done with this part of the game, and now I can go focus on a different part of the game. But as I developed it, I've kind of tried to branch into the other areas as well. And so providing more ways for players to interact, like players who care about socializing. And so, fleshing out, I did like a chat rework last year, nice. Or creating more events for players to work together in, as far as like corporation events or guild events. And then for explorers, trying to find things that, are reward you for kind of messing around and playing with the game. So it's not quite there yet, but just like recently I added a trophy system, which is purely cosmetic. And as you kill monsters in the different zones of Elithor, you have a very, very small chance of getting a trophy for that zone. And so it kind of is like an achiever thing, but it's also kind of an explorer thing. Like as you're just going through, you might not even know that these trophies exist. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, I found this trophy. This is kind of like a cool, fun thing. I think the place that Elithor is probably the weakest is killers. There's not really any PvP system. There's a bit of competitiveness as far as like leaderboard stuff, but not really anything that appeals to that player type. So yeah, it's kind of like where it fits. It's kind of, I'd move it up and to the right, and maybe it's starting to move down a little bit, but it's still staying to the right.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like, it's interesting hearing you talk about Elithor, because for me, I was thinking about Imperial Conflict as my example, my history, and how it's pretty heavy on the killers, like maybe too heavy.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that as I was doing some research for this topic, and a lot of stuff clicked for me, because this is a new concept for me. Like I've been vaguely familiar with it, but I'm not like super versed in it and the details and all that. But a lot of stuff made sense. Like, oh wow, we have a problem in our games, and I've experienced this when I play. Is like it's aggressive. Like you jump in and it's heavy PvP. Like I wouldn't say that's the only thing you could do in the game. That's definitely the dominant play style. Yeah. So I kind of sympathize for the people who've come into the game and they don't want to be participating. They have an interest in the world, but that's not their goal. Yeah. So they get kind of like booted out because like, man, I can't even hang without someone like just kicking the crap out of me. So I'm appreciating this framework to look through as a developer and as a player, to try to imagine like, well, what's fun, people are coming in for different reasons, and it's nice to support a diversity of play styles, and just keep in mind like games should be fun. And if it's imbalanced to the point that you feel like your style of play just isn't even fathomable, that's kind of a problem. So
yeah, it's interesting trying to balance these things as you develop a game too. Like I've heard before that like any game that has killers or attracts killers needs socializers. Like you need fresh fodder to come in and be killed, right? Like if you have a game only with hardcore people who are trying to kill each other, that kind of gets old after a little bit. Like you kind of need, soft targets, if you will, to go after. And the same with achievers. Like if everyone's an achiever and everyone's trying to top the leaderboard, it becomes really competitive. But if I can be an achiever in a game full of like explorers, for example, I feel like I can move up the leaderboards and accomplish things faster. It feels like I'm moving ahead of people. And so you kind of want to be able to appeal to the different player types, but it's also really difficult to do that like in the context of one game, especially like as a single developer, like a lot of PBBGs are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking now too, just about other PBBGs that kind of, when I started playing these types of games, even back then when I was more competitive, there was still a strong sense of kind of discovery and wonder for me when I dive into a game world for the first time. So I guess that's another example of like, there being overlap for, any individual player. But I played a game called Planetarian. I don't know if that was my first one or if it was Utopia. It was one of those two, like way back in the day. They're kind of like, 4X style games that was heavy on the competition, but there was still some world building in place enough that you really could like just kind of explore around. Even if there wasn't like a heavy graphical element or even a map or anything with some of them, but there was still a sense of like, what's out there? What could I find? I did enjoy that. I feel like that, when it's done well, it feels like, it satisfies that itch of just wanting to explore, like natural sense to see what's out there,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a game that focuses on a smaller number of quadrants and tries to do it really well can succeed more than something that tries to appeal to everyone. Like I'm thinking, I tend more towards the top of the chart. So I am more of a killer achiever, not really so much on the socialize and exploration. But I think back to like playing Neopets even back in the day, which is very heavy on exploration and socializing and has almost no like PvP. Like when I played, there was no PvP element at all to it. The achievement was pretty much RNG. Like if you got a rare Neopet versus not, there wasn't really a whole lot of, competitiveness with that, but I really enjoyed it because it did the socializing and the exploration like really well. And so, even though that wasn't my primary type of game that I enjoyed to play, because they niched down and focused so hard on that aspect of the player, like interaction, it like really appealed to me. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. It's interesting too, thinking because my play experience, when I think about this stuff, in terms of PBBGs, I do wonder where the analogs are to like other types of games, other types of video games, even physical games, like, I don't know, like football or something. It's interesting to compare and contrast, I guess, how these things apply or can apply, given the different media, the different media, I guess.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that, for me as a killer achiever, like someone who prefers that side, a lot of games that appeal to that require player skill. So not just like, oh, my character is getting stronger, but like myself am getting stronger, whether that's a knowledge about the game or like reflexes or learning a certain, rotation for skill set in something like World of Warcraft or learning a champion really well in League of Legends. Like there's a lot of player knowledge that goes into becoming better and better. But with PBBGs, it's really hard to do that. There's not a lot of Twitch reaction. It's not a first-person shooter. There's usually not reaction time that depends on things. It's typically the decisions that you make and how that plays out long-term. And it's difficult to create a game that appeals to that type, but it's also difficult to balance a game that appeals to that type. Like something that I've encountered is if you have something that requires constant like nitpicking or like little tiny adjustments like every hour in order to stay the most optimal, like those kinds of games wear me out really fast because, people who don't necessarily want to be 100% efficient don't really care. It's like, every couple of days I'll come in and I'll check in and I'll do this stuff. But if I see, the way to be the most efficient is to like micro this like crazy and be on every single hour, like that really burns me out. But it's also difficult to balance something around, something only happens once a day, then I don't really get to interact with the game very much. But if it happens like super frequently, then that, again, wears me out. So finding that balance of like letting the player make choices and be involved in the development of their character and in the development of the world, but without requiring like, crazy attention to detail is an interesting balance that I've seen PBBGs kind of fall all over that scale over the last few years.
Yeah. We got an interesting comment here from Delta saying that he bounces around the entire matrix depending on his mood. And, that makes you really think about, the possibility of role play being an element here. That you could kind of pretend that you're a different player type depending on what your goal is for the, for the larger context of the play experience. Like maybe you want to, for a round-based game, maybe you want to play as a killer and just try it out and be hyper aggressive. Which I've done that before with Imperial Conflict. I've played rounds before where I'll say like, okay, you know what, I'm normally a nice guy. And I'm going to just go ahead and just like destroy the noobs this time. And it is kind of fun to like, maybe play in a different mental space just to try it. So the idea that it's maybe mood dependent or, a temporary thing more than a general style for yourself is kind of fun to think about.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important too, like as from the developer perspective, but also from the player perspective, like really advertising and marketing as to what the game experience is. Like if I go and visit your game for the first time, what kind of, quadrant are you highlighting to me? Are you highlighting this as a heavy PvP game, or are you highlighting that there's a whole world to explore, and kind of using this as an initial like gut check reaction for new players? Like, are you appealing to the right kind of player for the game that it is? Because I bounce around the different quadrants as well, and like if I know of a game that fits pretty squarely in one of these quadrants, like I'll gravitate toward that when I'm wanting to play a game that's in that quadrant, as opposed to trying to find some game that scratches every itch simultaneously. Like there's so many games and choices to pick from, like you may as well niche down and focus in on one thing.
Yeah, I do wonder if there's a degree of I don't know if progression is the right way to think about it, but maybe as you come into a game for the first time, if you kind of, everyone's going to have a sense of discovering what the game world means, regardless of the player type. It's kind of like you have to know what you're playing. So I wonder if there is a way that you could have a game experience where it's like, okay, to start, everyone's an explorer to a degree, and as you kind of decide what path you want to take, maybe there's things that are introduced to you to cater to a specific type versus the other. That'd be an interesting design kind of like consideration to kind of not balance it all right up front, but kind of piece it in depending on how players want to make their decisions.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm catching up on chat here. Feel free to drop any questions or comments if you guys have anything you want to throw in here. This is our second live stream podcast we're doing here. We definitely appreciate all the insight from you guys as well.
Yeah, we're trying to find a good balance between like making a podcast and interacting with a live stream.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's been fun. It's going well. But if I sound flustered at all, it's because I'm juggling. So don't mind that. Got another comment here from Opus Vire. You can implement a feature that can be carried out idle and also active. Then you could cater to both these moods. And you can increase the reward for playing it active, but keep it minimal so it doesn't force into the micromanagement on an hourly basis. That's interesting. So this is providing the type for both types of players depending on where they're at.
Yeah. I've seen this done well, and then I've also seen it done really poorly, where like your idle time is so trash that you would never do that and be competitive. And depending on the type of player, right? Like, what does competitive mean? Am I just trying to explore the world and find things out, or am I trying to be number one on the leaderboard? And if you're forcing me to be active 24/7 to be number one on the leaderboard, that's going to turn me off personally, right? Like I, as a achiever, don't want to necessarily touch that kind of a game. But if you have other people who just want to explore and then come in and play for a little bit when they want to, and then go back and be idle and know they're still progressing, like that could appeal perfectly to that kind of a player. So again, it's kind of knowing, what are you trying to be? What are you wanting? Like, what kind of game are you trying to find?
Yeah, definitely. Got another comment from C Rotaire, one of our friends from Imperial Conflict. Playing Pie's game. Yeah, some rounds he competes, others he does laid back, just chat in Discord and have a little fun. So for some context here, despite Imperial Conflict being a highly competitive and sometimes I think maybe too aggressive of a game, there still is an opportunity for players to play in a more laid back fashion. We have an interesting economic type of a player that can play in our games. They don't even want to mess with wars. They don't want to fight anybody. That is supported to a degree in our game. So it is nice to have that option for people who just want to come and maybe think about math a little bit, maybe optimize, economic strategy and that kind of stuff, and maybe engage more in the team aspect of helping each other out while trying the best not to get killed off, I guess.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So maybe you can expand on that a little bit more. So for my context, I used to play Tribal Wars. And so Tribal Wars is very like aggressive of a game. Like people will come in and take over your village and you get rimmed, which basically means you get sent out to the very edge of the world and you have to start from scratch. And so that kind of play style works a little bit, but then you become a really soft target for people to just hit later in the game and take over all that economic growth that you developed. Mm-hmm. So how does Imperial Conflict kind of differ from that? How does it reward the economic player without basically setting them up to fail?
It's kind of like maybe even a reputation thing. I think a lot of our players value knowing that they are a go-to for economic strategy. It's not necessarily well represented in the leaderboards, especially because the team rankings are valued a lot. So you could have a player who does a lot of the economic planning, does a lot of the legwork, but they won't necessarily see the fruits of that from the game's perspective. They won't show that they're the highest on whatever. which is good in a way. I mean, it's obviously bad in a way because you'd want those players to be more, you would want their status as a economic achiever to be more reflected, I would think. But on the flip side of that, it does, I think, show something for the socialization aspect of our game, that they value that amongst each other, even if it's not necessarily concretely visible. It is something that we need to work on for sure. But it's nice to know that that's despite the game being so aggressive, that's still present in a way.
Yeah, that's super cool. I appreciate that. I think like it kind of reminds me of support characters in MMOs, like a healer type, where you're critical to like the growth and the progression of like your group, but you're never going to be number one on the DPS charts. You're never going to be the one who's like, making the big numbers pop up, but you're still critical to that role. And that kind of play style really like it appeals to me. Like, I don't really want to be the person with the big target on my head, making the big bold claims, but to be able to support the team from the back and be able to provide them the resources they need to succeed is like very appealing. So that's cool that you kind of can balance both of those play styles. Yeah,
we try to. It's not a perfect balance, but there's definitely a multifaceted experience with the game as it is right now, which is it's fun for me because like it's funny whenever I do try to play. I'm horrible at math. I can't do math, so I always kind of lean into the attacking aspect of it, and it's nice to have players that we know are consistently reliable that could kind of like back me up. Like hey, I shouldn't do this planning because I'm going to suck at it, and our team's going to go to crap if you rely on me. So we're gonna rely on you because we know that you can do it. And that part's pretty nice.
That's cool.
Got a comment from a Siratur again. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I think that's Rhetorica backwards. I know that I'm familiar with Rhetorica.
Okay,
but a Siratur, but I'm not sure how that's supposed to sound. Anyways, I think that's Lord of the Rings Online. They're a dwarf guild, fancy to have the highest rank, but also we like to show off in mass roleplay gatherings. Okay. Yeah, so I guess that's the achiever situation. You're trying to flex a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, I definitely see like World of Warcraft doing the same thing, where they appeal to each quadrant and they have core features of the game that are heavily supported for each quadrant. And, different expansions will do different, they'll highlight different areas better. But yeah, the level of like time and talent that it takes to develop a game that appeals so much to all four quadrants is just crazy. So I have a lot of respect for games that do that.
Yeah, it's a lot of tinkering. A lot of iteration.
Yep.
We've got another comment here from Regni33. Started IC as a social thing. Back when it had a 10,000 player base, once you started to achieve things in the game, you turn into a psychopath. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the appeals. Like when I was watching some of these videos and reading about players like, the killer type, it was interesting to kind of like see it spun as a positive because it's not a bad thing. If players get satisfaction out of, competing and killing off other players in the context of the game, that's could be a good thing in the right context. But in our game specifically, it's so imbalanced sometimes that I kind of like naturally think of it as a bad thing. Yeah. So yeah, I totally get what they mean there. You chase the rankings. I guess that would maybe be a combination of the achiever type and the killer type for some of our players that they do. It's a means to an end. They become a killer type because they want that number one spot.
Yeah.
It's we got some work to do there to balance that out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to balance because typically games like that will reward you for picking on people smaller than you, which is not necessarily something you want to reward. Like you want to give new players like room to grow and time to like experience the game before they get, shellacked by somebody who's way better than them. But if you tip it too far the other way, then it becomes like almost impossible to grow. And you have this blob of players at the very top who don't let anyone else near the top. So yeah, I can see like it's difficult to balance things like that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being a farming issue, or for us, it's like, oh, you come in and you're just there, you're just a planet farm for us. You explore a little bit and it's going to be gone like that. And yeah, it is. It's funny to see how that affects the socialization aspect of it too, because we do have the killer types who like to taunt and like troll to a degree. Yeah, so, okay, I could see how that could be fun, but yeah, it's a little much sometimes.
Yeah.
All right, thinking here about any other PBBGs that come to mind. It was interesting when I played Planetarian for the first time. I discovered it with my older brother. This is like, we had moved at the time, so we didn't really have anything to do. We are just kind of killing time, and we found it, and we had this this cool experience with us as a team, brothers just going into this world of like thousands of players and just exploring that world. And I'm getting nostalgic thinking about it because it's so like such a distinct memory of discovery. Did you have any memories of early PBBGs that gave you that like sense of wonder or anything like that?
I don't think so. Like, I think, Neopets way back in the day to a degree, just because I'd never experienced anything like that. Tribal Wars for sure, but more on the hardcore end of things where it's like, oh, wow, like, players get way more into this than I thought, like using scripts and like you have to use a certain kind of browser because the tabs open in a certain way, like is crazy. But then past that, like there really hasn't been anything that's really made me go, wow, this is like really impressive. Like I started to get into a couple of MUDs back in the day, and just the depth and the amount of content that those games have is just astounding to me. Sure. And so finding ways to kind of bring some of that into the PBBG space, like just the breadth of content and room to explore things, is a note that I made before, but I feel like the exploration quadrant is something that's kind of unexplored by PBBGs. Like as a text-based or mostly text-based browser games, like it should be relatively easy to create new content. Like if I think of a huge game like, a World of Warcraft, the amount of effort that goes into creating content for that goes well beyond the story and even like the voice acting and the balancing of the numbers and levels and scaling, but it also goes into like creating the art assets for it. How do you move around this world? Like, what does it feel like? What are the colors that get used? And PBBGs do that to an extent, but they're also like pretty heavily limited in that. And so it feels like it should be possible to create a exploration heavy PBBG that just has endless amounts of content that's really easy to create and just give players like lots of stuff to explore. But it's something that I haven't really seen a whole lot in this space. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong areas, but it's not something that I've seen a whole lot of.
Yeah. Well, you made a point earlier that, just because so many of our games are, have limited dev resources, that's going to be a limiting factor there. But I also wonder, we've been talking about AI a little bit recently, just in general. I wonder to what degree that's going to facilitate some of that to, not, I'm trying to think of a good way to describe this, to do it in a way that feels well done, I guess. I don't know have you ever
it feels more handcrafted and less AI generated.
There you go. Have you heard of the infinite, I think it's called infinite bowls of oatmeal. Does that sound familiar at all?
No, I've not heard of that.
So it's the idea that, okay, you have a bowl of oatmeal and you could make that bowl any number of colors, any number of sizes. You have an infinite number of combinations of how you could present that bowl of oatmeal. But ultimately, it's still a bowl of oatmeal,
Right. Yeah.
So that being the kind of comparison is that, AI generated content, isn't it's not a magic bullet you could just throw at something like this and make it feel right. There's going to be some level of thoughtful AI prompting or something, or just maybe taking that as a baseline material and massaging that into something else. But I do wonder, in the next year or two, or as AI becomes more, easy to access as a tool for game development, if we will see something like PBBGs touching on more of the content that would facilitate the explorer type of play style. That would definitely be interesting.
Yeah, I would love to play something like that. Like I have ideas for what something like that might look like as far as creating it, but I'm not typically bent that way as a player. And so things that I might think would be interesting or fun to explore, other people might go, that's lame, if you're a dev and you're out there and you're trying to think of a game and you love exploring and stuff, this is your golden opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to look at it. It's interesting. We get comments sometimes in our Discord where people ask about like games types, like, oh, does anyone know of a game that does X, Y, and Z? And whenever that happens, I always think, oh shoot, no one's answering. It seems like there's an opportunity right there.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Let's see, I think we got a comment here from Max Stream. Don't think a lot of PBBG players are explorers, since to them it's just tedious timers. You won't go through fields, see pretty sunset, mountains, dragon flying in the background, etc. Of course, 3D world will be much more beautiful, so might as well go play it instead. That is an interesting point, that our games do lean text heavy. Like, not all of them. Obviously, there are others that are doing interesting things. But that, I think maybe there's some truth to that what exploration means, how that's reflected in the game experience, maybe determining how what developers are trying to present. But I do think there is something to having a world that you could imagine through the power of well-written text. I think that can go a long way, despite it not being like some beautifully rendered 3D whatever. But that is a fair point.
Yeah, I think like if I think of exploring a world where it's just paragraphs of text saying like, oh, and there's a beautiful sunset and there's a dragon flying in the background, like that's not really gonna appeal to me. But if there's like different locations, for example, and you can travel to locations, and then you only can unlock a new location by doing this quest for this one guy who says that he has, he lost something, he needs help finding it. Again, I'm terrible at the exploration side of things, but as you go through and explore these different areas and talk to the different NPCs, and you kind of can piece together a bit of a story and uncover new locations, uncover new items and equipment or bonuses, things that can still help you progress and move forward. It's not purely exploration based, but just that breadth of content required, like coming up with new areas to explore, coming up with new text conversations to have with NPCs, or even integrating free text conversations that you could have, or, descriptions for the different monsters that you're fighting. Mm-hmm. Instead of it just being, monster 34, like maybe that's a certain type of monster that has a certain type of, a reason that it exists in the world. And you can uncover that through story if you care to. And if you don't care to, you can still just kill it and get the drops, right?
Sure.
But just like tying all that stuff together more cohesively and giving the players something that they can sink their teeth into rather than just, paragraphs of text explaining the sunset that you're looking at. So it's a different angle, but I think it still appeals to the same type of player.
I think so. And that's an interesting point about, let's say, monster number 42 or whatever. Like the idea of an explorer type, they're not just exploring literally the world, they're maybe exploring the experience. So, if let's say you have 100 different monsters and something different happens when they all die, like they have a distinct death, text, whatever. Yeah. It kind of reminds me when, I used to play Final Fantasy games. Part of the fun of that was seeing how the different enemies would react depending on how you attack them or how they died or whatever. I guess that's kind of maybe in that realm too.
Yeah, of course. Like maybe there is an entire element system in your game, like fire and ice and earth. And if you attack with certain types of attacks or elements, it's stronger or weaker depending on the monster you're fighting. Mm-hmm. But maybe when you first start the game, you can't actually see those elements. You have to actually learn about them from an apothecary in town, and he tells you about the different elements, and then you start to realize it. And that's when the game shows you what those elemental things are on different monsters, or right. It's still exploring. It's still getting deeper into the world. Mm-hmm. And I think that can be done through a browser like really well.
Yeah. I mean, we got a comment here from Shadira 89 saying you could still tell a great story in a book.
Absolutely.
Aren't inherently better than books just because they're visual. Yeah, that's a good point. That's kind of where I was thinking as well. And I've made this comparison with PBBGs before that, they're definitely considered maybe old school compared to like the most, the newest, flashiest game. But, books aren't going anywhere. There's still great CGI in movies, but people are still going to read books.
Yep.
In the same way, the games that we have, they're not going anywhere because there's going to be people who prefer to experience gameplay through a text medium. And even though it may be harder to imagine what exploring a world might look like visually, I think to the point that it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It's very possible. It just takes maybe a certain type of approach to evoke emotion or evoke that feeling of discovery through massaging text in a certain way or pacing it in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another comment here, even text adventure types of games keep busy exploring for weeks back in the day. Well, yeah, I mean, that's I'm thinking even of something as basic as like a choose your own adventure book.
Yeah.
Like when we were kids, those were fun to read. I think there's an exploration aspect to that as well. But yeah, it's definitely, it is a limiting factor on our game type, but not it's not impossible by any means.
Yeah. And I found that those limits actually enhance the creativity and can make the end product better. Like I think of how good even like very, very early video games were, like, Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, and how those games were, groundbreaking in so many ways, even though they had so many limitations as to like how much code they could fit on their disk, like what colors they were allowed to use, like what kind of animations they were allowed to use because of the processing power limitations, like, and then I'm not saying that games these days are worse, but there definitely is, there are games that lean too heavily on the flashy graphics to try and get their point across rather than focusing on good quality gameplay. And I think PBBGs are in a good place where they can really focus on good quality gameplay because of the limitations that are put in place.
Yeah, definitely. That's very true. When as you're talking about Nintendo games, music comes to mind. It's like, there's very, serious limitations on what they could do musically back then, but so many cool things came out of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Got a comment here. True, but needs less developing skills probably, or imagine a good writer or developer working together. Yeah, I mean, that's where the power of having a solid team, specialization, someone who could, for me as an example, not being good at math, if I could find someone who could specialize in math, or in balancing a system that could maybe appeal to the achiever type or the explorer type in that way. It helps when you have people with skill sets that you do not have. I struggle with that a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are there any games outside of PBGs that you think back on? Like I was talking about Tropico a little while ago, and just that one comes to mind to me because I got sucked into it so hard. Like I was addicted to that game. Did you have anything like that for yourself?
Not like a whole lot, I think, but I'm just thinking as far as games I've recently enjoyed on opposite ends of the spectrum. Like I've said before, we did like one round of like a hot takes or like something like that on this podcast. It was like, hey, what's like something that you want to just tell everybody about? And I think I was telling people about the game Foxhole, which is like a persistent war game where basically you hop in and you are a cog in the machine of war and you participate in this like real-time war that's going on. And that's like way up and to the left as far as the killer goes. Like it really appeals to the hardcore PvP players, the ones who want to like, destroy your bunker that you spent 2 weeks of real life time building and just shellac it with, tanks and stuff. Like it really appeals to that type. Mm-hmm. And I can really get into that and enjoy that type of a game. And on the exploration side, I played a game recently called Raft. That's like, it's kind of a survival game, but it's not very harsh as far as the rules of survival go. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of exploring this story. It creates this world for you that you're kind of, uncovering as you go, and you find stories of specific people in this world and how different, cultures have clashed over time. And you visit specific locations, and those locations have significance as far as the storyline goes. And you can go in and actually explore them and walk around, find hidden rooms, find treasures, things like that. And it's very heavy on the exploration side. And so and I've really enjoyed that game too. And so, like games that focus in really hard on a specific type or niche of player and just do that really, really well, like have appealed to me, even though they're on totally separate sides of the spectrum.
Yeah. I imagine it satisfies a curiosity to do something different than maybe the last thing that you did.
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting thinking too about how these things apply to, non-multiplayer games. I was reading a bit about that, how, the game designers throughout the years have learned from this, that it doesn't necessarily apply only to, a game where it's, relies on player interaction. I was thinking recently about BioShock. Did you ever play any of those?
Oh, yeah. Phenomenal.
Yeah, I love those games. But I did have this kind of moment where I think it was after BioShock Infinite that I just was reflecting on it and what an amazing experience that I had with that. And how I take the time when I play those games to go and find all like the recording logs and all these little bits and pieces here and there. And it's so fun for me. That's obviously an explorer type thing. But it was kind of funny to think back and realize like in terms of like the gameplay itself, it wasn't, it had some cool mechanics, in terms of the different upgrades you could get and stuff. But that wasn't its strong suit. Like it wasn't mechanically like something crazy innovative, like Portal or something like that.
Right.
It was definitely strong because the world building was so strong. That is definitely an explorer type game. So it's kind of fun to think back on. Like before I even knew this was a concept, now I'm kind of rethinking about games that I've enjoyed and thinking like, oh yeah. Why was that so good? What version of me was that appealing to?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think like the games that stand out the most are the ones that just do focus in, like they focus in really hard on exploring, or the entire incremental game movement is focused pretty high on the achievers, like people who just want to see the numbers go up. They want to see things get better. They don't really care about the rest of, this spectrum. They just want to see, numbers go up. They want to see themselves improve and progress. And so I think that's part of why it had appealed so much. Like before incremental games, I can't really think of anything that scratched that achiever itch in such an effective way before.
Oh yeah.
And so, yeah, it's like pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, that makes sense. As I think about those games too. One thing I don't know, maybe you could help me understand this a little bit, because I don't play a lot of idle games. I've enjoyed them when I do try them, but I haven't been able to stick with them very much. But I've always wondered and been curious about, like, how does that social interaction work for the socializer type person who may be playing those games? Like, how does that work for a game that is played more passively?
Yeah. I mean, short answer, like, it doesn't.
Okay.
Like, those games really are like super focused in. Like, I imagine some players who get really into the minutia of the game, like probably join the Discord server. They're probably talking about strategy with other players and how to get to certain points. But even then, it's not so much a comparison of like, where's your progress versus my progress and how do I get there? It's like, I'm looking at this mechanic and these numbers. How does this fit together? And people are working together to kind of uncover the formulas of how to move forward. But it's less of a socializing, experience, as opposed to like how I'd imagine like a guild system would work in a PBBG, where like you're cooperating with your fellow teammates to try and achieve a goal. Like it is very isolated and, separated. And I think it's probably the same like on the killer side as well. Like there's not really any appeal to those types of players for, some idle games, because there's not any like weight. Like when you land, a headshot in a first person shooter, like there's weight to that. Like it feels good as a killer player. Like I'm winning, the points pop up, like the screen lights up, like everything is saying this is like a good thing, makes me feel good. Yeah. In an idle game, it might be like, you killed 1,000 monsters while you were gone. There's no weight. I don't feel good about that. I don't feel like, oh man, let's get to 1,001. Like, one more kill. It doesn't feel that way. Which, maybe it's something that can be improved on, but maybe it's also just the way that it appeals to that certain type of player.
Sure. Maybe it's just inherent in that type of game, or that design. Yeah. That's just not where the fun is going to be.
Yeah. And I think of like on the opposite side of that achiever, like the socializers, games like Gaia Online way back in the day, or Club Penguin, or Habbo Hotel, games like that were almost purely socializing. Like you could change the cosmetics that you got, but it was mostly just interacting with people in some kind of a chat room. And I personally never got those games. I was like, what do you do? Like you just, how do I unlock like the super rare stuff? Like I wanted to achieve something in those games, but other people just wanted to get online and meet strangers and just talk to people and socialize.
Yeah. My friends and I, we laugh about that sometimes, because we dabbled in Habbo Hotel back in the day. And for us, it was just goofing around. It's like, the five of us on AOL Instant Messenger, just coordinate, just go goof off and meet people and just be silly. It's funny thinking about that like it almost didn't seem like a game even, but now that, thinking about it in terms of this, system, I guess it is, because you do have a goal. You do want to socialize. There's something that you do want to do. There's a purpose. It's just not obviously a game, maybe. Yeah. Those were pretty fun times. I had a point here I was going to say, but I got so excited about Habbo Hotel, I forgot about it. It's what you were saying about the your response to the socializers with idle type games, that I'm hearing that as maybe it's more like a socialization on a metagame. Like you're not socializing within the game. You're just trying to play with others to kind of play a layer on top of the game, maybe. Yeah. I think that's probably as far as it goes. Because I think as much as like I think that games like Habbo Hotel are not games because there's nothing to do, like you just socialize. I think players who prefer like to role play and have a character and be unique and express that uniqueness. Like I've seen plenty of criticism of like incremental games that it's not even a game. Like you don't do anything. You're just watching numbers go up. Like it's not, you know what I mean? And but for me, it's like, no, that's like the essence of a game. That's like the core of a game. Yeah.
Again, just like different.
You make. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like, that's the way I'm bent, and I would never bend toward like a social game. But then there's people who are, on the opposite side, where the socialness of a game is what makes or breaks it. If the game doesn't have chat or a forum, like they just won't touch it because there's not that socialization aspect to it.
It's fun too to think about how I don't know to what degree these quadrants combine, if there's like subtypes or something. But when you're talking about, players getting together and talking about strategy, for example, like we had that in Imperial Conflict, maybe not so much anymore, but in the early days when a lot of the stuff was still kind of a black box, people didn't understand like the exact formula for determining a battle outcome. Players would get together and they would theorize like, well, let's try this. And even people who would normally be fighting wars against each other, they would take a break from that so they could test fights against each other just to help each other understand the game better. And to me, that seems like a mix of something like a socializer and an explorer. It's kind of fun to think about how these things might combine in interesting ways.
Yeah.
I'm just catching up on chat here again. How are we on time? I think we've got about another 10 minutes or so. If you guys have any other last minute comments or questions, we're open to hearing about your experiences, any particular games that you like playing, or what type of player you think you might be based off of these types. Definitely open to hearing it all. I'm thinking now about just like what other types of games that I've played, multiplayer or not, that have like satisfied these types of itches that I didn't even know that I had. Like achievers, I'm thinking about that. I'm not typically one for like I don't know if you play like a Game Pass or Xbox rather, if you chase the Xbox achievements or anything like that.
Oh no.
Yeah, I don't either. I've sometimes wondered if that's more just like there's got to be players who care about that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Achievement hunters, that's definitely a thing.
Yeah. And it's weird because like I would count myself as an achiever, but then I think of like, the Mario games and people like I would treat that game as an explorer. Like I would want to explore. I'd want to see all the levels. I'd want to finish the game as in like get a game over screen, but I wouldn't want to achieve it in the sense of like getting all the stars or finding the hidden ones or, people who want to speed run certain games. Like, how do I do this the most efficient way possible? Like that degree doesn't interest me so much. And so again, like even in the quadrants, I think there's a spectrum of different player types.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good example with Mario and Zelda too. I'm thinking the most recent
same.
What was it? Breath of the Wild.
Yep.
That was the first time I think that I've ever tried to get like 100% completion on a game. I normally don't do that. I'm not normally an achiever, like I was saying, but I tried it for that one because I love the Zelda game so much.
Yeah.
And after I did it, I discovered that I don't like doing that. The game was fun enough for me without doing that. So I don't think I'm going to do that again. But yeah, I do see how it could appeal to people who want to just, get everything.
Oh yeah. And I have friends who would say that if you didn't, 100% the game, you didn't complete it. Like it's not even done. You still have more to do. And in my mind, I'm like, no, like 80% is good enough. That's like fine for me. So
yeah. We got a comment from Sleepy T. A lot of MMOs, I enjoy the vibe and having people around, but not explicitly socializing, chatting, etc. So do I identify as socialized, but still roughly there? Oh, that's pretty interesting. I can see that making sense, that maybe the world, like not feeling like you're alone in the world, like it feeling like a living world. Is touches on that area, even if you don't explicitly try to engage with all the people that you come across. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way, and I think it's because I'm an achiever. So if I'm achieving things, but there's no one around to see it, it doesn't feel as good.
Sure. Yeah.
So like I want to have people in the world so that they can check out my cool armor, they can see my rare title or my super rare pet or mount or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I don't actually care to like interact with those people. I just I want them around to validate my achievements, right? Which sounds kind of shallow, but it's also part of that, part of that achiever quadrant.
Sure. Well, it's like you're saying that, there's relations between these types of players. Like the killers, they can't be killers if there's no one to, be there to kill. I mean, it's kind of like, it's almost like killers is an expression of socializers. And maybe there's other ways that works in the same way. Let's see. A C Rotor is saying playing hot seat games with our brothers was a social event, but all three we wanted to achieve and kill each other. Okay, that's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Like there's value in, like, I'm thinking for myself playing Street Fighter with my older brother and his friends and our friends. That's definitely a social thing. We are socializing with each other to do that, but the focus is really on killing each other.
Yeah. Like same with Super Smash Bros, right? Like that, I wouldn't really want to play that online. Like I'm not trying to be competitive and rise to the top there. Like I play it primarily or exclusively like, not hot seat, but like, what is that, couch co-op where we're all sitting together and kind of playing. But again, the goal is to kill other players and be number one within the context of socializing, right? Not in the context of just being really good at the game. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, even exploration. I mean, I guess that's what the kind of recurring thought I'm having as we talk more and more about this is that really it's this quadrant. It provides structure to think about this, but there's almost like a little bit of everything. I could imagine in any game, like even something like Street Fighter, like as you play it, you discover how to play it. That's exploration. It's really not so black and white necessarily. Any PBBG that comes close to that feeling is a winner. Yeah, I mean that's the goal, is for our games to have you feel satisfied, and I guess that's what this gives us a framework to do, is to kind of not discover but implement things that give a diverse set of players not happiness, but just gives them that joy. The reason they play a game for fun.
Yeah, and I think the feeling that's being talked about too is like it kind of moves to the socializing side of things. Like if I'm number one on the leaderboard, who did I have to step on to get there? Right? If it's just number one, that feels good. But if it's number one because I know I beat so-and-so and they were the head of this alliance with this other person, but then I worked with the other person to backstab them so that I could step over them, right? Like that feels so much better because of the socializing aspect, because of being able to interact with other people, like creating like a set of rules or a set of like values that you hold to. Like I think too of like a lot of guild systems, it's kind of standard in games, almost to the point where it's watered down. But I think like the purpose of that is to allow players not only to cooperate and work together to achieve together, but also to compete against other guilds, right? Like there's guild versus guild competition, even if that's not expressly shown in like the leaderboards or whatever. Like if I'm typing in chat and my guild tag is next to my name, there's a certain level of prestige that comes along with that. Like, oh, you're a member of such and such guild. That's super cool. And that is kind of on the socializing aspect, but the way that you got to that level of prestige is through like achieving or killing or exploring or, another quadrant as well. So yeah, I definitely see how they can bleed together from that perspective as well. Yeah.
It's fun as you're describing that. I'm having fun thinking about some Imperial conflict experiences. And I remember there was one round that I played back when I was, back when the game had more players and I was more active, that I had played the round before with a team that was like number one or two. Is a really, really, well regarded team. They were like high in the ranks. We were, kick ass, all this stuff, right? And then the next round, it was happening again, and I just got so bored because we killed off all the competitions. Like there's no like fun, there's no challenge. So for me, I remember it was kind of a dramatic thing at the time because I quit the team. I said, all right, I'm bouncing. I'm going to go and start at the bottom. And it was this big dramatic thing. It kind of breathed some life into the game, because it's like, okay, well, if you're bored at the top, this is drama now. It's something new is going on. And it's kind of fun to think, or funny to think like, okay, you go from being a killer or an achiever, I guess, but for social reasons, you give that up to do something else. And then now there's like a reputation, there's a social reward, there's something that's valued in a different way than just being high on the ranking list. I'm really liking this framework of thought. Just I'm reflecting on even my own past gaming experiences with Imperial conflict, which I've played for years. It's nice to have a tool like this to rethink about some of those things with that lens.
Yeah. And from like the game design perspective, like giving the players the tools to do something like that. Like, do you let players leave the team that they're a member of and go back to the bottom of the rankings and start over, or are they locked in for life on this character and they can't leave? Like, what kind of choices do you let players make? And then thinking about the implications and the ramifications that come with those different choices and how they can be used to create compelling story and compelling like player generated content. Or can they be abused to create like a negative experience and be used in a way that's like, oh, that wasn't the intended use for that. Like there's a whole breadth of, decisions and choices and ways that those different things can play out. So yeah, it's really cool to see, especially in the PBBG space where it's relatively easy to spin up a new game. Like what kinds of choices do developers give their players and then what, ramifications do those choices have? How can that play out? I think can make games that seem very similar on the surface be drastically different once you kind of get into the weeds of it.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'd be excited to see if anyone's takes some, this kind of idea and prototype something just to explore like some certain game loops or mechanics, just to see what does it look like to focus just on this? How does that feel? That could be a super fun exercise.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I'm getting more ideas too, even as we talk about this, which is terrible. I don't need more ideas.
Yeah. Well, as I was reading about this earlier in the week, like it was really opening my eyes on problems with Imperial Conflict. It's like, man, like I really need to like look at some of the player feedback and think like, okay, I mean, this isn't like a magic bullet, like I said before.
Right.
But it's definitely a useful tool to think like, maybe this thing that I was planning, maybe I need to rethink that. Maybe it's gonna, maybe it's not going to have the effect that I think it's going to have, and using this as a way to kind of maybe frame those thoughts. Got a question from Sleepy T, and I think we're gonna call it shortly after this, but maybe last one before we go out. Where do we see the PBBG scene going this year or the future? That's a pretty great question, but it's a difficult question.
I think we had even talked about this being an entire episode, to be honest. Like, we're like, what kind of technology is underused? What kind of themes have not been explored? What kind of games could exist that don't really exist right now? Yeah.
I'll touch on that briefly because there's two things. We talked a little bit before, like 30 minutes ago, about what AI may be bringing to the table in terms of game content for PBBGs, and how that may, like most obvious thing for me there is that it may serve explorers, but maybe, socializers as well, probably all of them. But independent of that, I've always thought that Twitch, there's such a missing opportunity right now for PBBGs to embrace Twitch. So there's, Twitch APIs, there's stuff like Stream Raiders, and, there's games where you could interact with your players or with other players on stream, and it happens through a web browser. So to me, there's such a huge opportunity to kind of blow open the experience of what a PBBG feels like and lean more into the real-time aspect of it, in the performative or spectator sport aspect of it. Let's say. And that's obviously a socializer type of thing. So I don't know what it's going to look like in the next year. I mean, we can't predict the future, but I know that Twitch is, still going strong. Streaming is still going strong, YouTube gaming, and et cetera. So between at least those two things, AI generated type content or type challenges or whatever, and some type of, maybe discovery of more games in the browser that would appeal to Twitch streamers, that could be really interesting to see if that goes anywhere.
Yeah. I think from my side, like without like tooting my own horn, I feel like there will be more games that are similar to Elithor in the way that things are a bit more handcrafted. Like Elithor doesn't have infinite progression. A lot of stuff is gated. Like there's tiers that you go through. Every monster has like a specific name and a specific description, has like a certain type that it belongs to, like an archetype. It has even the drops that are associated with it are named based on the monster that they come from. And those have their own descriptions. Like there's a lot of depth that you can explore there. And I'm bad at this. So if someone who's bad at it is kind of hobbling together all this stuff and these descriptions and the flavor that goes into a PBBG, I'd love to see a game that basically has like pretty simple mechanics on the surface, but leans heavily on the exploration side where, maybe you have a quest system, and within that quest system, you let players create their own quests and vote for which quests are good versus not good. Like that wouldn't be difficult technologically. It would be difficult, to curate those and create something that's compelling and interesting to explore. But I think creating more tools around that fits the browser very, very nicely. And I haven't really seen people do that. Like a lot of the games, Elithor included, seems to be very cookie cutter as far as like idle and, the way that you progress and stuff, where I feel like there could really be a lot of variety in the kinds of content that players are allowed to explore. And whether you call it a game or like a Habbo Hotel-like experience, I think there's a lot of room to explore there. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's like the need for a framework to support user-generated content, but also allow the players themselves to partake in the curation process instead of being dependent on staff. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. It sounds very flavorful.
A lot of interesting things. Yeah.
Flavor is something that's not too hard to balance. Like numbers and progression and how it feels to like level up and stuff is a little bit more complicated and hard to do. Like there is a wrong answer. With flavor, I don't think there's as much a wrong answer as something that feels right or doesn't feel right. And so, getting the community on board to create that flavor on your behalf and giving them the tools to, bring it forth into the game, I think would be a huge win.
Yeah, the gears are turning for me now. I'm thinking like, we got to call out. But last thought for me, I guess, the idea of a framework like that being set for just an open-ended game. I could imagine players creating their own quest for anything they want. Like, let's say they like Harry Potter. They want to make a Harry Potter like set of quests to go do their own thing. That sounds fun. And like you're saying, being in the browser does make certain things more accessible or easier to do in some ways. So I could see that for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we are going to call it here. Every time we have one of these talks, I always feel like, man, I want to keep going, but we got to contain it.
Yeah.
So let me. We're gonna find somebody to raid into. By the way, we are doing these live on stream now, so we want to send everyone to another streamer, maybe another web developer, or game developer, or something. But thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Zaalah, again for being here.
Absolutely, it's fun.
Do you want to plug Elthar while we've been talking about it? Might as well, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm kind of starting to not rebrand, just refocus a bit. So I have a game studio, if you will, called Cardboard Machete. I'm wearing the hoodie right now with the logo.
All right.
And we publish Elthar, which is the game that most people have probably heard about. It's like a sci-fi RPG, and you progress and get stronger. And it's kind of your standard sort of MMO type game, but text-based and in the browser. And we're also working on releasing Trounced, which is a PvP kingdom building game, hopefully in the next couple of months, hopefully sooner. I'm actively working on it. So I'm trying to get that out to people. And I'd love for you guys to check those games out. If they're not for you, great. If they are for you, you're welcome.
Cool. And for myself, I'll plug my game as well. I run ImperialConflict.com. It's a space-themed military strategy game. It's been around forever. It's not in the greatest shape right now. So just so you know, some things are being reworked, but it's there for you. It is fun. We have a great community. And and as well, we have a Patreon here if you guys are interested in supporting this podcast that we're doing. We're on our 6th episode now. It's been going great. I'm sure we're going to have more to come. So that's patreon.com/PBBG. There we go.
There you go.
All right. I do see someone on Twitch. They are doing some kind of game dev situation. So we're going to send a raid over that way. It looks like they may be doing some 3D modeling as well. So it sounds kind of cool. So let me load that up real quick and we'll get you guys over there. Thanks again so much, everyone, for hanging out.
Yeah, we'll see you around.